Guardians getting a big win over the Royals, a must-needed win after they fell their first 3 games in the series. Tanner Bybee not looking like himself on the hill, but the Guardians offense able to pick up the slack late in the game, along with discussion on Deshaun Watson's restructured deal and the Browns releasing Tyler Huntley. All my thoughts on that coming up next right here on Raw Takes. Welcome to Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty. If you enjoy the show, as always, please like and subscribe. Also, make sure to check me out on social media. Hoty Andrew on Twitter/X or Facebook. You could find Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty, or on Instagram at Hoty Raw Takes. So the Guardians getting a big win over the Royals 7-5. Tanner Bybee was just giving out home runs like Oprah yesterday. You get a home run, you get a home run, you get a home run. But, the thing about it is this. Tanner Bybee has had such a good season overall that it's really hard for me to just ridicule him for a few mishaps. We still won the game because the offense came later on with Bo Naylor hitting a home run to really get things going. I just am stunned by the fact because we were so gassed and looked gassed in that game and that entire series just to open things up that we were able to turn that game around the way we did. And we came back against the Royals earlier this season thanks to a Bobby Witt error, where we were down 5-0, and Seth Lugo was on the hill, and we kind of watched that unravel that day. But that was way earlier in the season. We've really struggled with the Royals, and the Royals obviously have the season series, so they do have an advantage over us in that aspect of things. But the fact that the Guardians came back and clawed the way they did for a must-needed win was really impressive. And they have Pittsburgh over the weekend, which should be an easier series, but hopefully they figure things out in terms of how their offense is going to continue to roll, especially against a weaker opponent. The other thing I think is really big when you look at the Guardians is they have to play Kansas City one more series next week in KC. It's going to be really important the Guardians get 2 of those 3 games because they need to really cushion a division lead. Some of the good news for the Guardians is Kansas City has to take on Houston this weekend. And so if they could ease the pain and the bleeding a little bit by getting some wins over Pittsburgh to kind of build upon a division lead and let Kansas City hopefully falter against the Astros, that'll be massive going into next week when they play each other once more. The Guardians, if they want to win the AL Central, are going to need to take 2 or 3 from the Royals, on my opinion. There's probably still ways they could do it without, but the Royals have really been their kryptonite this year, and they got to figure out how they can overcome that. But yesterday's win was huge, and they have to build upon it. I think looking at the rotation, it's coming to form. Obviously, if Alex Cobb comes back sooner than later, that's been a big question mark for the team all season, and obviously the offense being in a massive, massive slump. But Steven Kwan getting back to some base hits yesterday. Jose Ramirez and Josh Naylor kind of coming to form a little bit in the recent stretch. But, when you look at the rainout that took place on Tuesday night, the Guardians, when they came back that night, looked absolutely gassed. And another questionable decision was why was Scott Barlow, the bullpen pitcher, in a 2-1 game? Scott Barlow is a guy I'd bring in if you're up 6-1 or down 6-1. I don't know why he's a 2-1 guy you'd go to. Maybe the Guardians just didn't have the arms necessary needed at the time, but to me that was really questionable to go to Scott Barlow when it was only a 1-run game. And it was troublesome. Proved to be troublesome. We lost that game to the Royals as we lost a series to the Royals, but this win I'm celebrating because we really needed it. It gives us a cushion in the division. Minnesota's still kind of on the trail a little bit. We have to play them one more time too, but we do have the season series with the Twins. But it's going to be really important to pay attention down the stretch here this September and hopefully have a September to remember. Pittsburgh, I think, is going to be necessary. I want to go for all 3. I think you need to win all 3 of these games against the Pirates. They're not a very good baseball team. They're a bubbling 500, mostly below 500 team at best. They just got swept by the Cubs. No excuses. The Guardians have to go out there and handle business with the Pittsburgh Pirates this weekend. I'm going to the game on Saturday. I'm really pumped about it because I think the Guardians season has really exceeded expectations for all of us. You can't take away, no matter how this season ends, if this season is a failure, that it is a failure. Because no one thought the Guardians were going to make the playoffs this year, and it looks very likely that everything has to go wrong for the Guardians to not make the playoffs. So that's going to be the big thing for them going into September, is how do they stay afloat, not only in the division, but to ensure that they could build upon that lead in the AL Central. They have a one-game lead right now over KC. So Minnesota's not far off either when you look at the standings. It's going to be an interesting September, to say the least. And as I said before in a prior edition of Raw Takes, I love the fact that the AL Central has 3 playoff contending teams right now with Minnesota, Kansas City, and Cleveland. But, there's other good news, too. We do play the White Sox this month. I know we've struggled with the White Sox this season, but we have one more series with them. If we could rattle off some wins against the Sox, I think that's going to help the Guardians' chances more. But you look at some of the opponents coming up on the schedule. Obviously, Kansas City and Minnesota are tough. We have to play them each one more time. We have Houston to end the season, and we struggled with Houston when we saw them last, but that's when Houston really wasn't good, and now they're really picking up the pace now. Hopefully they do so this weekend against the Royals. And you also look at some of the other teams we play. Pittsburgh, I think, is one of the easier opponents, the White Sox. But the LA Dodgers are also there. St. Louis and Cincinnati are also in the schedule for this month. St. Louis and Cincinnati should be some easier series for the Guardians. I know Cincinnati's for only 2 games, But Cincinnati's got good offensive players. I mean, Ellie De La Cruz is one of the best offensive players, in my opinion, across baseball. He does strike out a lot, which is one of his biggest flaws, but that guy has some power behind him. So there's definitely some tougher matchups coming up for the Guardians, but there is some of those easier opponents as well, especially when you look at St. Louis, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, and the Chicago White Sox. But we have struggled with the White Sox this year. So those are my thoughts in terms of the schedule for the Guardians. In terms of if they're going to make the playoffs, I think that's going to be a given. Seeing how far behind Boston, Tampa Bay, and Seattle are in the standings, I think the Guardians, if they absolutely collapse this September and it's just miserable and they don't even get to 90 wins, honestly, at this point, if they don't get 90 wins, the season wasn't a failure because we were a lot better than we expected. But at this point of the season, it's a failure because the Guardians have no reason to not win 90 games. With the season they had, with the April and May that the Guardians have had, they cannot go out there and not make the playoffs. I'm sorry. The season will be a failure if that's even the case. But that'll also go to my next point on why I think the season is a success regardless of what happens in the postseason. No one expected this team, nobody expected this team to, at one point of this year, be 23 games above 500. Nobody. Nobody predicted that at all. We saw what we saw last season. I think a lot of people knew Stephen Kwan had potential and could develop into a really good leadoff hitter, in which he has. Maybe not as much in the recent stretch, but he has developed into a great leadoff hitter. He led all of baseball in batting average at one point. He doesn't now, obviously, because of a slump, but let's be honest, do we really believe Stephen Kwan is going to continue that slump long term? I don't. He's going to figure things out. But no one expected Stephen Kwan to take off like he did, as much as he did this year compared to the last 2. In my opinion, I don't think many people expected that. Jose Ramirez and Josh Naylor, obviously, you have your home run machines there. But Josh Naylor really taking off this year. We saw potential in it last year, but this year it really just rocketed into the sky, and Josh Naylor's potential has grown significantly. But obviously I think there's question marks about what his future will be in terms of the Guardians, in terms of the contract situation. We'll have to learn about that as time goes on, but let's just take it for what it is right now. Josh Naylor having an exceptional season, even though he's also been in kind of a slump. And I don't think we talk about enough how much Josh Naylor strikes out. He strikes out quite a lot. And then you also look at David Fry having a good April and May. I don't think anyone thought David Fry was going to come out of nowhere and do what he's been able to do. And this is an organization that struggled against left-handed pitching in recent years. David Fry kind of broke that barrier and started hitting those lefties, and I think that's really helped the Guardians significantly. Now, David Fry hasn't been exceptional from June onward. He's had some moments, I think, since the All-Star break. I think a little bit underrated in terms of the All-Star break. He's hit some home runs, including home runs off right-handed pitching. I think David Fry deserves a little bit more credit post-All-Star break than he did in between June and the All-Star break, because he really was lackluster there. But he's picked it up a little bit, and I still think David Fry is having a really good season overall. And he's a guy that you absolutely could trust to potentially ace some left-handed pitching. And then you look at the bullpen. I mean, the bullpen has really been the blood, sweat, and tears of the Guardians this year. I mean, Cade Smith has been phenomenal. Hunter Gaddis, I know he had some hiccups this week, but I mean, the one pitch he threw for a home run was off of Bobby Witt Jr. I mean, that's going to be your best versus their best. And Kansas City won the battle that day with Bobby Witt. But Hunter Gaddis, I mean, ERA under 2, he's been phenomenal. Lights out all season long. Really good to watch him pitch. You also got to look at a guy like Emmanuel Clase, who's just been the best closer in baseball. I don't want to say over the last 3 years, but probably over the last 3 years, just because 2023 was so faulty for him. He really had some hiccups last year. But you look at his 3 blown saves. 3 blown saves this year. The Guardians still found a way to win all 3 of those games. So the feistiness in this team is there. They are an exceptional baseball team when it comes to how feisty they are. Probably the most feisty Guardians team we've seen since Terry Francona took over the team. And I'm very serious about it. The 2016 World Series team was feisty, but this team I feel like is even more feisty in terms of they're not going to quit till they quit. And they haven't quit so far. And they showed yesterday they don't quit. Tanner Bybee gave up 3 home runs. 3 home runs to one of the best offenses, on my opinion, in baseball. The Guardians still find a way to win that game. They did it last week against the New York Yankees, too. They went 12 innings worth of it. Thanks to a Brian Rocchio home run in a game where Steven Kwan, Josh Naylor, and Jose Ramirez combined for 1 hit. So the feistiness of the Guardians is still there. And you also got to look at some of the back-ended players. I think Will Brennan is not given enough credit for being okay. He's not great, but he's okay. He hits the ball. He makes good contact. Andres Jimenez, he's not a power hitter, but he's got such a good defensive glove. He is such a good player when it comes to making contact with the ball. Andres Jimenez deserves a lot more credit, in my opinion, for the fact he makes contact, but it's been a long time since he's hit a home run. I understand that perspective. Brian Rocchio, I still think, has a lot of potential. He's still young. It's his first year in the lineup almost every day. Brian Rocchio, I still think, can have a bright future ahead of him. He's already hit 6 home runs. 2 of them were in winning games, 4 were not. But I still think Rocchio defensively has it and can work on the bat a little bit more to become a pretty good baseball player. I don't want to say great, but a pretty good baseball player. I don't want to give up on Brian Rocchio. I know a lot of people in town do, but I'm still a believer in him. I also believe that Daniel Schneemann has found his footing a little bit. He's better than Manzardo from what we saw Kyle Manzardo bring up here. And we all believe Kyle Manzardo has a high ceiling. I still do, but Daniel Schneemann so far has proven to me that he has a pretty high ceiling. He's still in the middle of the pack when it comes to the Guardians' batting order. And then you also look at guys like Bo Naylor, who had a really tough open to the season. But, I mean, Bo Naylor still had that grand slam in that stretch. He's come clutch at times. He had a home run against Kansas City the other day. And it really started the momentum swing for the Guardians in that game. So Bo Naylor has had his moments. His batting average isn't out of this world, but, I mean, he's way better at the plate than Austin Hedges. Austin Hedges is just a great clubhouse guy. I'm not a big believer in Austin Hedges as bad at all, but Austin Hedges defensively is really good, and so is Bo Naylor. So, to me, you can only ask so much out of a catcher offensively when they're behind the dish every day almost. I mean, give Bo Naylor some credit there. He has done what he's had to do in terms of hitting the baseball at times late in the year and some clutch home runs. Bo Naylor has gotten the job done, I think, more often than we give credit for. I think the batting average, obviously, is the batting average, and that doesn't tell a lie. But there's been moments for Bo Naylor, too. The Guardians' lineup and rotation is built around, I think, 3 guys primarily, and that's Steven Kwan, Jose Ramirez, and Josh Naylor. And this is a team, you're reluctant to find teams that have 3 guys that hit even as well as they do. I mean, the New York Yankees, it's all Juan Soto and Aaron Judge. Kansas City, primarily Vinny Pasquantino and Bobby Witt Jr., of course, and you look at Salvador Perez, too. So that's kind of a 3-man lineup. But, I mean, Perez has got some power behind him. He's not as reliable as Bobby Witt Jr. at the plate. I wouldn't even say he's as good as Pasquantino at the plate either. I mean, there's some guys on that Kansas City lineup that have some nice moments, but they're not a phenomenal lineup as a whole. And their rotation's pretty good, but their bullpen's a disaster, and they proved it in the Guardians' win yesterday. And they're going to play Houston this weekend, and Houston's a team that tends to hit a lot of runs late in games. I think they're going to struggle with the Astros this weekend, and I'm kind of hoping so because it'll help the Guardians hopefully build a bigger lead in the AL Central as long as they beat the Pittsburgh Pirates this weekend. So there is a lot of potential for the Guardians, I think, to still win this division. And once you get to the dance, you just truly never know. You just never know what will happen. You just never know. Obviously, we struggled against the Yankees this year. We've struggled against Kansas City. So those are probably some opponents you don't want to see. But we played Baltimore really well. We've played Minnesota really well. We've played Houston okay, but we still have 4 more games against them at the end of the season. So I think the Guardians are in prime position right now, but this weekend has got to be the focus. Try to get all 3 of these games against the Pittsburgh Pirates. They've been in a massive, massive slump. That's all you got to do. Just get 3 wins over the Pittsburgh Pirates. They're not a very good baseball team. They're not. They have a great player like Paul Skeens pitching sometimes, but their offense is pretty putrid for the most part. They have some guys that could hit fine, but the Pittsburgh Pirates are not a good baseball team, and it's going to be on the Guardians to go out there and win. All right, let's move on to football, the NFL. Obviously, some news today with the Browns. Deshaun Watson's deal will be restructured, and Tyler Huntley has been cut. Now, as I am recording this, those are still reported. They're not official by the team yet. But $36 million, according to sources, will be adjusted for Deshaun Watson's contract to free up some cap space there. And Tyler Huntley not going to be on the Browns roster. I think that's not a surprise to most of us, even though he made the initial 53. I personally think the Browns made a mistake keeping DTR. I know they drafted him, and they're very hesitant during the Andrew Berry, Kevin Stefanski regime to really let go of their own draft picks. They have at times, I don't want to say all the way, but they have at times like Cade York and Anthony Schwartz. But I think they made a mistake keeping DTR because DTR is still just a project. Tyler Huntley, I believe, is a guy that has NFL experience and can go out there and win now. Now, with that being said, that might be a money-related issue why you don't want to keep Jameis Winston and Tyler Huntley on the same roster because we've seen quality football out of both of those quarterbacks. Obviously, I think Jameis is much better in terms of his arm especially than Tyler Huntley, but Tyler Huntley has some really good mobility. When he was backing up Lamar Jackson in Baltimore, we saw him move that football really, really well. So that's why I'm very hesitant to say the Browns made a good decision moving off Tyler Huntley. If they had the ability to keep him, I would have. Just because we have that sample size of Tyler Huntley. And if Deshaun Watson gets injured again, and let's say something happens to Jameis Winston, hopefully no injuries take place, knock on wood. But Tyler Huntley would be a guy, I think, at number 3 you could actually really trust to back up. Because obviously P.J. Walker really wasn't. But what am I saying when it comes to P.J. Walker either? Because the Browns found a way to beat the 49ers defensively with P.J. Walker playing quarterback. So, but P.J. Walker wasn't the guy. He was better than DTR at the time, which is why I think we benched DTR after that one Baltimore game we lost last year. But last year, when it came to getting Joe Flacco in the building, it was about moving off Josh Dobbs. So I think the Browns actually made the right choice last year when they moved off Josh Dobbs. And a lot of people disagreed with that decision at the time, but they did that because they freed up some space a little bit and they were able to get DTR rolling. But to me, the Browns' main thing is they're not in position to develop a quarterback right now. Even if it's about developing a backup quarterback. We think DTR as a quarterback could be a high-tier backup, like a Jameis Winston, like a Tyler Huntley. I don't see that. I don't see the Browns necessarily being a developmental organization right now. They don't. They're winning now. So you need to get all the players in the building, first string, second string, third string, fourth string, that can win now. This is what the Browns have to do. The Browns roster is constructed to win now. End of story. So developing a possibly good high-tier backup quarterback in Dorian Thompson-Robinson is not a priority for the Browns. The priority for the Browns is getting Deshaun Watson healthy, up and running, throwing the football, running the football, making plays to make the Browns offense function, score touchdowns, get in field goal range, and win ball games. It all comes down to winning ball games. And the Browns keeping DTR around doesn't help them in there, on my opinion. And I think DTR does have a good ceiling. I think his ceiling is high. I think he can be a top-tier backup. But that's fine anywhere else in the NFL. Anywhere else in the NFL. I'm sure Pittsburgh would love to have another quarterback on the roster. I'm not saying DTR should go to Pittsburgh by any means necessary, but I'm sure they would love to add another quarterback to the Russell Wilson, Justin Fields room. They would love that. I'm sure Cincinnati would love to add a quarterback along with Joe Burrow being there. I mean, there's teams across the league that could use a guy like DTR more than the Browns, in my opinion. And the Browns believe in DTR. It's their draft pick. I get it. It's good to develop those late round picks into something. But DTR's ceiling is a backup quarterback in the NFL. And obviously the Browns aren't worried about making that a priority for this season because it isn't. But that's what I think of when it comes to keeping DTR around is we believe this guy could be really good down the line. And if anything, barring any emergency happens to Deshaun Watson or Jameis Winston, knock on wood, we have Dorian Thompson-Robinson ready to go. But the guy's sample size isn't that big. We've seen, I believe, 3 or 4 games with DTR under center. And the sample size I've seen is he wasn't ready in the one game against Baltimore. The Pittsburgh game, he was okay, but he wasn't phenomenal. The Denver Broncos game, kind of the same way in terms of the main games he's played in. And in the preseason, he looked exceptional. I get it. But you're playing the 3s and the 4s in the preseason. You're not playing string 1 and string 2. You're playing the 3s and the 4s. I would have kept Tyler Huntley if I was the Browns. If it was a financial aspect, I guess I'd be more happy with this decision. But seeing the Deshaun Watson freeing up cap space move today, that's a possibility. I am not certain that the Browns keeping DTR was the right decision. I'm just not. I am absolutely all in on having Tyler Huntley here, just because I saw the sample size in Baltimore. Maybe it's from that game the Browns played against the Ravens in 2021 where Tyler Huntley almost led a comeback. I mean, I saw Tyler Huntley play some darn good football. He's not Lamar Jackson, but he had played a very similar style to Lamar Jackson as a backup quarterback, and I like that about him. You don't have to change the playbook much when you have mobile quarterbacks like Deshaun Watson on the roster. Jameis Winston, he's got some mobility too. I think Jameis Winston is much better with the arm, but Tyler Huntley, I think that mobility he brings to an offense could really help it out, and the Browns could use that, barring any emergency, obviously, because we want Deshaun Watson to be the guy on the field. But I would be very, very nervous if DTR ended up being the first-string quarterback, barring any possible injuries to Deshaun Watson or Jameis Winston. But granted, if the Brown season goes very well, maybe Dorian Thompson-Robinson could develop into that really solid backup QB that we believe he can be. And that'll be good for the Browns long term. But again, I believe in sample sizes in the NFL. I need to see him start more before I can believe it. He has some great plays. Good to go. But the future of DTR is not the Browns' priority. Obviously, the priority is winning the AFC North or making the playoffs somehow and going on a significant run. They got boat raced by Houston last year. Boat raced. The goal this year needs to be win a playoff game. Get to the playoffs, win a playoff game, and stay in the bubble to that degree. And I think it's going to all fall on Deshaun Watson, believe it or not. Not Kevin Stefanski or Andrew Berry if that's not the case. But I believe Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry will share some big part of the blame if the Browns end up having a disappointing season once again. The other thing I want to talk about is the argument for Joe Flacco staying in Cleveland. A lot of people talk about this because Joe Flacco had such a good stretch of games here. But what we don't realize about Joe Flacco in 2023, and it was a great story, came off the couch, won some ball games, Browns made the playoffs down the stretch, barring all the injuries they had. It was a great story. Kevin Stefanski, I think, really was the story of 2023. And the reason is because he proved what a damn good head coach he is. A damn good head coach. Andrew Berry proved what a damn good GM he is. Damn good. Made the right calls at the right time when players got injured, and it was the next man up. I'm very proud of the Browns as an organization for having Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski run the show. Very proud of that because they clearly know what they're doing. But that was really the success story to me for 2023. And for granted, it got Kevin Stefanski or Steven Stefanski head coach of the year by the AP. I mean, obviously, that was the story for me of last year. It wasn't Joe. I mean, it was Joe Flacco, but to me, Joe Flacco was just part of it, if that makes sense. Like, I'm glad he came off the couch and had a great run. I'm glad he did everything he did. He helped the Browns get to the playoffs when we desperately needed a quarterback to do so. Joe Flacco did it. He did his due. But all the coaching around him and Joe Flacco just coming fresh off the couch, as great of a story as it is, we don't look, on my opinion, at the Browns' schedule during that stretch to how they made the playoffs. And if you really look at it, how unimpressive it actually is. And that's not to say Joe Flacco's ceiling at the time was a backup quarterback. We didn't think Joe Flacco was going to be the 2012 Flacco we saw that took the Ravens all the way to the Super Bowl. I don't think anyone thought that was going to reemerge. But when you look at Joe Flacco during that stretch, the Rams game we lost, but he beat the Jacksonville Jaguars, who were in the middle of a late season collapse. The Houston Texans with C.J. Stroud not on the field. He beat the Chicago Bears in a comeback victory, which was great, but the Bears were nothing to sneeze at. They're not a good football team last year. And the New York Jets, who were a shell of themselves. That's not very impressive. What that was a good way to get to the postseason, and the Browns desperately needed to prove that Kevin Stefanski was the guy and Andrew Berry was the guy. That's why the Browns had a successful 2023. We learned that the organizational structure is working, and it's working very well. Kevin Stefanski was one of the top hot-seated coaches last year. Saved his job completely. Nobody got fired. That was the success. Joe Flacco had a great story, but Joe Flacco did not shoot the moon for me. He just did not. He did what he had to do to get the Browns into the playoffs. It was a very pathetic end-of-the-season schedule that helped the Browns significantly make the playoffs, but we all saw it tumble down once they got to the postseason, and the Houston Texans, with a healthy C.J. Stroud, absolutely boat raced the Browns. And the defense was very awful in that game, too. And the defense was the best in the NFL last year. So that didn't help. And obviously Jim Schwartz, I think, is going to be looking back on that tape, trying to adjust every little thing he can to ensure a game like that doesn't happen again. But that's going to be the big thing. I mean, the defense cannot play like they did in the postseason again. And the Browns got kind of lucky with the schedule. And they've proved that they have a great organizational structure. That's why 2023 was a success. It wasn't Joe Flacco. Joe Flacco had great moments. Glad that he went to the Indianapolis Colts. But it's for the best that the Browns moved off of Joe Flacco and brought in Jameis Winston. And the reason is as great of a story as Joe Flacco was, and we'll be talking about it for years to come, and which we should, Jameis Winston plays much more like Deshaun Watson. You're paying Deshaun Watson all that money, obviously, so he has to be the guy. And the other thing is this. Joe Flacco doesn't have the same kind of style of play that Deshaun Watson does. And he's almost 40 years old. And the biggest thing, I think, for this season on why you had to move off of Joe Flacco is one simple thing. Forbid that Joe Flacco is the backup quarterback for Deshaun Watson, and Deshaun Watson throws one interception, the stadium's going to be chanting Flacco, 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 after one Deshaun Watson mistake. Deshaun Watson needs to be the guy. Doesn't need to be Joe Flacco. So the Browns as an organization absolutely did the right thing. Absolutely 100% did the right thing. I am always going to be thankful for what Joe Flacco did as a Brown, but when I look back on it, I'm not very impressed. The Browns did what they had to do, and the organizational structure is really where I'm happy with the Cleveland Browns. And that's why I'm excited for 2024 and beyond. Even if this year does not end up being a good year, hopefully no one gets fired, and Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry figure things out to have a better 2025. But this season is going to all come down to the quarterback position. And the reason it does is because the offensive line is there. We know how good that line is. I know Bill Callahan's not there anymore, but I think outside of that, this is going to be a good offensive line. Jedrick Wills is the one question mark. Wide receivers are there. Like I said before, the Browns don't get enough credit for bringing in wide receivers because they just don't draft them very well. Amari Cooper and Jerry Jeudy were brought from the organization externally from other teams, and they're going to get the job done this year. They're there. They're solid. Amari Cooper had a 200-plus yard game against the Texans last year. I'm sold on the wide receivers. The running back room. The running back room is going to be phenomenal. I don't understand the move off of Deontay Foreman, but Nick Chubb, when he comes back after the 4-game stretch that he's out because he's on the PUP list, hopefully he comes back after that 4-game stretch. But obviously, we got to take our time with Nick Chubb. But I believe Nick Chubb's going to come back better than ever. Even though it was a significant injury, that's just the kind of guy Nick Chubb is. He works at it incredibly, incredibly hard. And it was a real heartbreaker when he got hurt last year, and he wasn't a part of the great season we had. So the running back room is going to be there. And then the other big thing is that defense is loaded. We have the defensive tackles. We have Myles Garrett as an edge rusher. We have Denzel Ward. We have J.O.K. in the linebacking core. The defense is star-studded and is going to shut down many opponents this year. It's going to be on one guy, one position. I don't even want to say one guy because Deshaun Watson, if injury bears, as I said, knock on wood, Deshaun Watson, Jameis Winston, any injuries bear, or DTR, it's going to come down to the quarterback position to play well. Good quarterback play, Browns make the playoffs easily. Bad quarterback play, we start to look at possibly 7-10, 8-9, and the season falling off the rails. But with how good the AFC North is, someone's going to have a bad season, and the Browns are possibly the team that could. Could be the Ravens, could be the Bengals, could be the Steelers, could be any of the four. The Steelers always find a way to be at least above 500. So I don't think it'll be them in terms of the rails completely falling off the tracks. But someone in the division's going to have a bad year. It's going to be one of those four teams, regardless if they all finish above 500. Cincinnati finished above 500 last year, but I still think their season was a failure last year because Joe Burrow got hurt, and that team on paper is a lot better than 9-8. So we'll have to see what takes place. The AFC North is, in my opinion, definitely the most competitive division in the National Football League. The other thing I wanted to talk about with the Browns is when we look at their defense in particular. I go back to 2022 and we talk about all the defensive errors that team used to make. A lot of the 2022 defensive personnel has been around the last 3 seasons. Joe Woods, I think, really was the difference maker, and bringing in Jim Schwartz was the right decision. I remember telling my good buddy in 2022, I bet you the Browns have one of the best defenses in the NFL that year. I was obviously wrong at the time. But Myles Garrett was there. Denzel Ward was there. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. I mean, you look at the core guys on the Browns defense now. They were the same guys then. Joe Woods proved to be the problem. And bringing in Jim Schwartz was absolutely the right call. Because that defense has been eating offensive teams alive. Alive. The potential was there. The personnel changes were necessary. And it goes back to the Browns, once again, as I said. The Browns, organizationally, have really come a long way. They have the right staff, the right GM, the right head coach. I think they're bringing in the right people. I think they moved off. I was kind of confused on the Stump Mitchell firing, I'll be honest with you. But other than that, I really liked bringing in Ken Dorsey. I think he'll do a much better job than Alex Van Pelt. So that was the right call. Obviously, we saw Kevin Stefanski move off of Joe Woods 2 years ago. Obviously, bringing in Jim Schwartz, the right call for the Browns. Kevin Stefanski has proven he can adapt. He can adapt with coaching staffs. He can still run the show his way with the coaching staff. And that's why I wasn't even worried. In Cleveland, we worried so much about who was calling plays in 2024. How did Kevin Stefanski do a bad job last year when we were 11-6? He did a pretty poor job, I'd say, in 2022 when we went 7-10. But that was also a lot of defensive issues. So that doesn't all fall on Kevin Stefanski. I think having Kevin Stefanski be the play caller with Ken Dorsey as the offensive coordinator is totally fine. I trust it 100% because they clearly know what they're doing. I trust the Browns organization explicitly now, and I can't believe I'm even saying that because I grew up watching the Browns blow game after game after game. I was there for the 0-16 season, the Hugh Jackson era, the Mike Pettin era, the Johnny Manziel era. 10-6 in 2007 was the only time in my life that I could remember the Browns being good, and they didn't even make the playoffs. And I know they did in 2002. I was alive for that, but I don't remember it because I was only a baby at the time. But I think it is very important the Browns figure this thing out with the personnel they already have because we know it's good, and we know the roster is just stacked. But the quarterback is going to be what it all comes down to. So if this thing goes south this year, I don't want Kevin Stefanski to get any of the blame. Maybe he'll make a few bad coaching decisions here and there. He's already proven he's a good head coach. Andrew Berry gets none of the blame either. He's brought in all the guys. And I will go back to the fact that at the time we traded for Deshaun Watson, I would have done it. I didn't love the contract idea, but when we brought in Deshaun Watson, yes, he's better than Baker Mayfield. At the time, he was way better than Baker Mayfield. All for it. Because the Browns needed to win and the roster was too good. And Deshaun Watson, at the time, I believed, helped you win more football games than Baker Mayfield did. With that being said, now where that argument comes to fruition today is Baker Mayfield now has more playoff wins than Deshaun Watson. Baker Mayfield has 2, Deshaun Watson has 1. And Deshaun Watson's one playoff game was back in 2019-2020 against the Buffalo Bills and Josh Allen. That's the one playoff win for Deshaun Watson. He was a passing yards machine in 2020 for a team that went 4-12 because they were so awful around him and they made the idiotic decision to move off of DeAndre Hopkins. Deshaun Watson on paper should be much better than Baker Mayfield. He just hasn't played. And that's barring, of course, the off-the-field situation, the legal stuff, all that. I'm going to put all that aside for right now and just say, at the time of the Deshaun Watson trade, the Browns 100% made the right decision. And I'm glad Baker is panning out to have a pretty good career now with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He had a great season last year. I'm not going to take that away from Baker Mayfield. But at the time when Baker Mayfield was here, it was just too much on him. The city was starting to turn on him. Baker Mayfield was not in good position to play with the Browns in 2022. So the Browns did what was right, and they traded for a guy they believed was better. And granted, obviously, the suspension took place this year, which is why I don't put 2022 all on Kevin Stefanski. But 2023, Deshaun Watson got injured, so we really don't have the true sample size of recent Deshaun Watson. We only have Deshaun Watson of the past and still do. He has to play like 2018, 2019, 2020 Deshaun Watson in order for, I think, anybody, especially in Cleveland, and for any sports analyst completely, to really be bought in and say the Browns' future is really bright and they can make runs for years to come. So that's what it's going to all come down to. But the Browns, as an organization, have really built themselves to be reliable. And I cannot believe I'm saying that for the first time in my life. 2023 proved it. Got the coach, got the GM, have the offense, have the defense. But the one thing in my life the Browns have never gotten right, the one thing, quarterback. Quarterback. You could fill 2 classrooms of Browns quarterbacks since 1999. That's how many they've had. From Tim Couch all the way to Deshaun Watson. That's going to be it for this week's edition of Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty. We'll be back next week for some more Raw Takes on sports. And I also want to announce that we're going to be having some guests join the show in coming weeks. Really pumped up to bring them on board and become part of the Raw Takes family. We'll have Raw Takes with multiple personnel, hopefully, in the future as we start to build upon what we're doing right now. But I'm glad to be with you guys as always. Remember, like and subscribe. Check out the show on Facebook, Instagram, and you can check me out at Twitter/X. We'll be back next week because I'm Andrew Hoty, and those are my Raw Takes.